We're here for lecture number 3 in our intermediate course in Objectivist Ethics, Ethics for the Individual. And when I talked about the conception of the course the last time, I said that one of the things that was interesting about this course is at this point, we wanted, in talking about the normative ethics, to start at the core. That the objectivist ethics is conceived of on an egoist foundation. It's conceived of being about your life, your happiness, your thriving, your flourishing, you. And so when we think about ethical principles, how other people come into the picture is an issue to be explored, not to be taken for granted. And normally when we talk, because we live immersed in society, and human beings are, in a sense, I think can be meaningfully described as social animals, we're not in a situation often where we're not part of society. So it's natural, if you're thinking about ethical action, to think about how you deal with other people. And some of those complex and fraught issues and relationships and projects you have to deal with involve other people. Some of the most important values in your life involve other people. So the other people and how to deal with them are very important for ethics, very important. But in the reasoning of the objectivist ethics, we want to bring people in only insofar as it's of benefit to the individual. So we want to begin with a conception of ethics where we want to think about ethics for the individual, for the individual as such. And that's what I want to talk about here. And so when we talk about the individual as such, we note, as David mentioned last time, that the human means of survival is reason applied to production. And so, in this session, we're focusing on that in the context of the individual apart from society, or without regard for society. So, in this sense, we're talking about ethics for Robinson Crusoe. Ethics that Robinson Crusoe, abandoned on a desert island, he'll need every one of the principles I'm going to talk about in this session. He's going to need them all. He needs a code of values. He needs principles for guiding his choices, even though he's on his own. And all these principles will be relevant to each of us, to each of you, as you are alone in all your activities, because your life is for you alone. And so ethics in this conception is fundamentally for you alone. And I think the core meat conception of a lot of what the objectivist ethics is about is we can see in this context. And then we want to conserve all that, bring all that goodness into social relations. And Alexander Cohen will be talking next time about the social ethics. So here I want to talk about first I want to dilate on the core insight that underlies all these values and virtues I'm going to be talking about, the life of the individual. And the life of the individual is based on the idea that reason is the human means of survival, that it's the human mind. It's the human mind employed exploring and creating value that makes people productive. You have radical examples of this, like the nearly paralyzed Stephen Hawking, who's a significant physicist and pursues a whole profession, or Jean-Dominique Bauby, who was dramatized in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, who was paralyzed except for his eyelid, yet wrote a wonderful memoir, did some wonderful things. That's the extreme of reason as the means of survival. But there it is. But more basically, production. So production is the means by which human beings use their reason to maintain their survival. Production is involved in practically every value you are encountering. Like in this room, the air is conditioned, the light is produced artificially, the tables have been made, have been produced, the surfaces we walk on, the sound of my voice that you're hearing is conditioned by things that were produced by other people, and of course the talk itself I'm producing right here. So there's production. In fact, you're hard-pressed to find values here in this room that haven't been touched by production or aren't directly produced. So production is the way in which we gain and create values. And it's just worth underlining that when we talk about productions from an objectivist perspective, we're not just talking about, say, things that are manufactured, but anything that human beings create and make. And that includes things like counseling techniques. It includes things like works of art. And sure, manufactured products like cars or farmed goods. Sure, those too. And the key link here, and the important thing to understand, is the link between reason and production, is that to engage in production, anyone who's involved in production has to engage in these steps. They have to be able to understand causal connections, to understand that doing one thing will result in something else. Even if all you're doing, say, is chopping down a tree, you have to understand that swinging the axe will chop the tree, will cause the tree to fall. And you have to be able to project an alternative to what exists in the world. So you have to see the tree and see the axe and imagine the tree being chopped and the tree falling down. And then you have to organize a long-term course of action. You have to commit yourself to undertake that process. It's not just one swing of the axe that chops the tree down. It's chopping and chopping and chopping and chopping and chopping and chopping. And then maybe actually what you need are logs. So then you've got to chop the bits of the tree all into parts. And you're chopping for quite a long time. It's not a momentary urge that's going to get you to do that. It's following a long-term course of action. And only a conceptual mind can do these things. And doing these things is of the essence of using the conceptual mind. So on this conception, we want to be talking about a view of values. Right? Remember, our basic question in ethics is, what are values and why does man need them? So when we start exploring the normative ethics, we want to talk about the values. What are the goals that human beings ought to be searching? Because we can't talk about what kind of actions should they take unless we know what their values are. And so we're going to talk about values that exist, that are things that one acts to gain and or keep in order to advance one's own life and happiness. And these are values that you identify by choice, in the context of your life, and based on the facts by the standard of life. You can contrast that with other ethical views, like the intrinsicists that say that values are just attributes of reality, or the subjectivists that say, well, values are just anything you feel like you like. But no, we're going to be judging them based on their impact on our life and happiness. And as David mentioned, at the sort of core constitutive value conception of the basic value or the process of life are the cardinal values. And I just had to throw in this slide because one of the things that Ayn Rand doesn't make perfectly clear in her discussion of the cardinal values, but that I think is clear once one studies them a bit, is that, why did she pick these cardinal values? Because she's talking about the basic means by which one acts, the values that one has to gain. You use certain means to gain certain values to maintain yourself in existence. That's the process of life. Right? So those cardinal values are cardinal values because they identify the major the distinctively human components of living as such, so that all your life-affirming action will be permeated by the use of these faculties and the pursuit of these values. But getting down at a slightly more concrete level, the ethics identifies broad classes of rational values, material values, spiritual values, and social values, but I'm not talking about social values right now. We'll come back to those. We're talking about Robinson Crusoe. But there are material values in this sense and spiritual values, where the material values are values that redound to the health of your body, and the spiritual values are values that redound primarily to the benefit of your mind, to the benefit of your rational faculty. And because you're using reason in production, everything that sustains your reason functioning well is of the essence to maintaining your own life. Because if your reason isn't functioning well, then your tool of survival isn't functioning well. If you're Crusoe on the island and you can't think straight and you're unmotivated to act, you're not going to survive long. Because of the key thing, if you're Crusoe on the island, is to keep yourself engaged with your values and think clearly about the circumstances you're in, the means at your disposal, and motivate yourself to keep growing and learning. And I just want to emphasize that in the particular case of the individual, of each of us, here these are abstract general types of values, but for each of us, these cash out in particular things that we value ourselves from our own mind and thoughts. That's what valuing reason is like for ourselves, or your own esteem for yourself. That's self-esteem for you. Your pleasure and happiness and the things that give you delight, your home, your food and clothing, your medicines, your career or your field of study, your music and artworks, all those things, that's how these values cash out in the particular. And with that context, so we're looking at, we're going to be trying to examine ways of living that conduce to gaining and keeping the kind of values that we've been talking about. And so that's what I'd like to move on to do. And in doing that, Objectivism identifies a variety of major virtues, where a major virtue is identified as a principle of action that's conceptually distinct. You can identify it by the characteristic values it aims for, by the characteristic vices it guards you against doing. It pervades your life, are used for major projects and major activities across your life, so that these are not occasional policies, but policies you're using all the time. And so here, of the major virtues of Objectivism, though, once we start thinking about what is the Robinson Crusoe ethic, or the ethics for the individual as such, it gets interesting, because there are aspects of the way the principles work where they have both a personal aspect and a social aspect, usually. And so here in this talk, I'm going to be talking about rationality, productiveness, pride, honesty in the sense of honesty to oneself, and integrity as loyalty to principles. But if we go on to talk about social virtues, then we'll have to talk about the virtue of independence. We're talking about justice and benevolence. Talk about honesty, but now in this case, honesty for other people, how you treat other people, and integrity as trustworthiness, as being trustworthy to other people. That's really a social virtue. It has to do with how other people would perceive you. Of course, it's all part of the same principle of action. It's just that there's this aspect. These social aspects are ones that I won't be talking about here, so that I can emphasize how the core virtues implement a policy of using reason to pursue survival and happiness in the individual. So let me begin with rationality. So rationality, we all know, means accepting reason as an absolute. It's the commitment to the full use of one's reason to grasp reality and to acting in accordance with one's rational judgment. And when we talk about rationality, we usually talk about it in terms of some sub-principles, and particularly objectivity and integration. Now, because rationality consists in principles for gaining or keeping knowledge, and knowledge is the identification of facts by conceptual means, you need a principle of objectivity as part of this. You need a principle of objectivity, which means basing your abstract ideas in the facts. You have free will, you can think what you want, you can imagine what you want, you can hypothesize what you want. This is a wonder of a human being, and it's, we were just remarking, essential to the productive process, but it means that your thoughts aren't guaranteed to be in accord with the facts. So you need a major principle of being objective and keeping your abstract ideas based in the facts. And doing this promotes truth in your thinking. It helps ensure that when you think the things that you think are the case, you know are the case because you can refer to the facts that make them so. This is actually, I just want to say, this is easy to say, but this is a lifelong practice and something that involves, loving facts more than you love the conclusion. And we all like to have ideas that we enjoy, or things that we wish were true, or that we really like to keep being true. But it's very important in those cases to have a good idea what the reasons are why one thinks it's true, and keep more wedded to the reasons than the conclusion, and keep the reasons tied to ongoing assessment of the facts and the reasons. And that promotes truth in one's actions. Now, integration is the policy of assimilating new facts, and assimilating new facts into the body of knowledge and relating facts in the body of knowledge to each other. So it's assimilating new facts, and doing this builds out your awareness because it's being open-minded, it's being inquiring, it's being willing to bring in new ideas, it's being thoughtful about things and thinking them through. But it's worth remarking that objectivity is of the essence for awareness. That is, you can't be aware without being attentive to the facts. And integration is essential to knowing truth, because one of the main ways in which you check the truth of your thoughts is to see if they're logically consistent with each other. Because if you have a logical inconsistency in your thought, something's false in there. So these are two different poles, loving the facts and loving new knowledge, loving discovery. That's another way to put them. Objectivity is loving the facts, integration, loving discovery, and these help make you more aware, build your knowledge, and help you stay on the premise of truth so that you have knowledge and not fantasy. I wanted to talk a little bit more about emotions, and rationality is related to the issue of how to deal with emotions in objectivism. And objectivism, Ayn Rand said, emotions are not tools of cognition. She said they're not tools of cognition. What she just means there is that emotions aren't the mental state we use to form conclusions about facts. That's just it. It's when you prove that you know something, you don't prove it by reference to your emotions. That's all it means. That's it. And another way of pointing out this point is because emotions are subconscious, conceptual, affective states. So emotions, what that means is emotions are mostly subconscious. They mostly arise from conclusions you've accepted or evaluations you accept. And we can change how we feel about something by changing our mind about it. Before you read Ayn Rand, you may have thought that the word selfishness was just disgusting. And then you read Ayn Rand, and then you started to have nice feelings about it. And you thought, oh, that's a good thing. So that's an example of that. But a lot of emotions happen at a subconscious level and reflect values we've inculcated. You may feel that you really love something, but you're not quite sure why. That's the subconscious aspect. But the thing is that emotions, because they're subconscious, they're non-objective. Because inasmuch as they are subconscious, you don't have any conscious control over them. But the essence of objectivity is to check that your consciousness is fitting the facts. Check that what you're attending to are the facts and not the non-facts. But you just can't do that with emotions. You can't say of your emotion, now emotion, make sure it's tracking the facts. It won't necessarily obey. And the other thing is that emotions are affective states. They're states produced by your evaluation of a situation, your past thinking about that kind of thing, your conclusions about that situation. It reflects your evaluation of the situation. It gives you an experience of the value that you're placing on that situation. But that's affective. It's produced by the conclusion or the evaluation. And so in that sense, emotions are the product of a judgment, but they're not the judgment itself. So that's why emotions are not tools of cognition. But what about emotions? Are they good for nothing? Oh no, they're good for a lot. They're good for a lot. In our cognitive economy, they're actually very important. People that don't have them have a hard time getting around. The thing is that your emotions give you a perception-like experience of values. They let you just feel that something is beneficial or harmful to you, disturbing or exciting. They let you just feel that rather than having to reason it through. And a lot of the times, just being able to feel that is essential and very helpful. It saves you a lot of thinking something through to have this direct emotional experience. It helps you experience directly something that's meaningful to you in a way that's like, it's just like experiencing the value, but as a direct effect in your own mind. And that's very useful for motivating yourself and for summarizing complex cognition in a way that makes it very directly aware. Sometimes there are times when you've been surprised by something that was scary, and you recognize it's scary, and the fear motivates you to get out of the way or run away and all that. If you'd had to have thought it all through, you might not have had time to react correctly. So that's great. Another thing about emotions is that your emotional feeling or your emotional intuition can be right when your conscious reasoning is wrong. That happens. But the thing is, this gets back to the emotions are not tools of cognition thing. The only way you know that happens is when you then check the facts, and you objectively check the facts, you integrate new knowledge, and you see what's really going on, and then you consciously realize and reach the judgment that, right, the way the emotion had been indicating was correct, and the thoughts you'd had before were wrong. But that happens at a conscious level. It's not like just because you felt the emotion strongly, therefore you knew it was true. That's not the case. And the other thing is that they summarize complex situational awareness. This has been popularized in a book called Emotional Intelligence that mostly has to do with social situations, but this is true more generally in situational in situations. They summarize a whole situation for you. So emotions, very useful in their context, very important in our mental economy, just not cognition. Finally, on rationality, I just want to wrap up by mentioning some vices of irrationality, like what are ways in which people don't engage in rationality. I think this is one of the reasons why this is a very important virtue. People tend to be biased. A lot of people will, substitute inaccurate shortcuts for the effort of thinking things through, and that often results in bias of different kinds, confirmation bias, or stereotyping bias, things like racism or sexism, or among objectivists, anti-religious personism. That was just a joke, but you've seen it. Those are very common. But even among objectivists, we're prone to confirmation bias. We're prone to pick evidence that confirms our views and discount evidence that is opposed to our views. So that's something we should militate against and try not to do. Dogmatism. Dogmatism is a form of irrationality, which is a violation against objectivity most of all, because it is insisting on the repetition of set words without attention to the facts or their meaning. So it's talking the talk without walking the walk. And that's irrational. Faith is a vice of irrationality, meaning believing things regardless of reasons. When you commit to believe by faith, meaning you're committing to believe something to be true, that's it. You commit to believe that it's true. But you shouldn't commit to believe anything's true without evidence for it. And then emotionalism is a vice. It is relying on strong feelings in the place of cognitive certainty, thinking just because you feel authoritative about something makes you authoritative, that's a vice. One final note to do with rationality. I had a lot of thoughts on rationality today. I've been thinking off and on over the years about the Aristotelian virtue of prudence, or also called phronesis, or called practical wisdom. This is a virtue to Aristotle, and a lot of Aristotle-influenced objectivists that I know, or objectivist-influenced Aristotelians that I know, think well of this concept. And the idea is, I think we have to understand that in the Aristotelian way of thinking, in Aristotle's way of thinking, there was sort of a big difference between theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. Like, objectivism, Ayn Rand is very strong on saying that all knowledge is useful and practical. That the model of knowledge, say, is industrial engineering. Taking the theory of physics and chemistry and then making it do something in the world. That's what objectivists, that's like all our knowledge should be like that, we think. But for Aristotle, it was more, there was knowledge how to do things, and it was useful, but there was knowledge of truth and abstract truths that you understood, and that was knowledge of things. And so for Aristotle, it was important to emphasize that you could know the meaning of the virtues and the theory of the virtues, but you needed practical wisdom, you needed prudence in order to be able to act in the right way, to have the practical wisdom to judge what the appropriate action was in each place. And for Aristotle, this is doubly so because he conceives of each of the virtues as being in a golden mean between extremes of action. So knowing where the mean was for Aristotle involved an action of judgment. And so I've been thinking about this from an objectivist perspective, and I've often been puzzled about it because I've got nothing against having practical wisdom. And of course, to apply virtue in life requires judgment. And I'm all for prudence. I'm all for prudence as an objectivist. But I don't think this is a virtue on objectivist grounds. I don't think so. Or at least it's not it's not clear that it's not already taken care of in our conception of rationality. At least I'm going to need an account of why that's so. That what is the peculiar vice that prudence is guarding us against? What is it that, say, objectivity and integration as principles aren't taking care of? That's my question. Because the objectivist theory of rationality unifies theory and practice, both knowledge and know-how. So that's the, I didn't have another. That's the thing. So that's my thought on prudence. And I don't think it's, I don't think, I'm not sure that it's I'm pretty sure it's, well, I'm just not sure at all that it's a required addition to the objectivist understanding of rationality. I think it's the counsel that one should act prudently and should use one's knowledge practically and understand how to use one's knowledge in practice. That's part of the objectivist conception of knowledge itself. So let me shift gears now and move on to the virtue of pride. So, you're Robinson Crusoe on an island. Do you need pride? Well, pride is a policy of achieving objective self-esteem by taking credit and responsibility for acting on one's judgment in accordance with moral principles. So, Robinson Crusoe has a need for this because Robinson Crusoe is a self-motivated being. You as an individual are a self-motivated being. You need the sense that you're worthy of living, that you're competent to live. You need that. And so this virtue consists in engaging in the self-assessment and the commitment to moral improvement that helps sustain that sense that you're aware of the reasons why you're a good person and you're aware of your commitment to going on to improving your life. So it means both taking pride in your past and having moral ambitiousness towards the future. Or another way to putting this is it's assessing oneself as a self-starter, both in terms of competency, saying, I can do it, or I did it, or in terms of moral worth, saying, it was good, or I'll do better at that. And if you've got self-esteem, that's your feeling about your life. It's not that you're always perfect, but if you weren't, you can do better. And you're worth it. And you don't give up because you're worth it. I want to talk about honesty for a moment. This is something on our basic understanding of objectivism quiz. Most of the people who took the quiz got wrong. Most of them got it wrong. Not you all. You all did great. But this is one of the cool things about objectivism. So in objectivism, Robinson Crusoe needs honesty. Why does Robinson Crusoe need honesty before Friday ends up on the island? No one on the island. Why does Robinson Crusoe need honesty? Because you're capable of misrepresentation. You're capable of storytelling to yourself. So you need a commitment to always holding to the things that you know to be true. So objectivity is your commitment to paying attention to the facts, basing your knowledge in the facts. But honesty is a commitment to recognizing the things that you know are true and holding to those things. And it means not replacing them with falsity in one's cognition. And we need that because we can misrepresent the facts. And that's something even Robinson Crusoe is going to need. Moving on to productiveness. Now, I'd mentioned the various forms of productions that we can engage in. Productiveness is a policy of taking responsibility for achieving one's values through the productive use of one's mind and body. And in the objectivist conception of this, a key aspect of this is pursuing a career of productive work. Now, so productive work is of the essence of what the virtue of productiveness is about. It means being engaged with the world to reshape the world in the form of your values. It means taking responsibility for getting your values, saying, this is my life, I'm going to be in charge of getting the things I need to live and be happy. And if we think about this in the context of Robinson Crusoe, when we think about living apart from society, this would mean creating values through consistent long-term work projects. You know, Robinson Crusoe's got to build a cabin, got to find a way to farm or collect food, has to, you know, it's going to need some art and things. It's going to need a lot of things. Maybe build a ship to be able to sail to other islands. And all those productive projects, that's your productive work. And it means also being in an ongoing process of developing your skills and developing mastery, so that as Robinson lives on the island, he becomes better and better at doing the things that he needs to do. So this is a value to you in your own life, no matter what you do, is pursuing your values through long-term work projects and developing skills and mastery. Now, in the social context, when we talk about a career of productive work, then we talk about something that's shaped by the fact that you can benefit from participating in the division of labor by specializing in trading. And that's not the case for Robinson Crusoe. He can't specialize and trade in that way. He's got to, but he still has the need to work on consistent long-term work projects and develop skills and mastery. And in either case, developing skills and mastery is part of the process. I want to just conclude by talking about integrity. You know, integrity as loyalty to values. Integrity means acting consistently with your principles, but then if it means holding to your values. So it means being committed to acting for your goals. So it means, you know, living consistently in pursuit of one's values, acting consistently with one's principles, and living as a unified mind and body in pursuit of one's highest value, one's own life. So it's, integrity then is, you know, a commitment to being the whole you, to doing everything in consonance with your own self. I think David mentioned the Manhattan Bank building scene in The Fountainhead, where Howard Rourke turns down the commission after the bank board comes back and says they want to change some aspects of his design. But this is sort of the emblematic moment of integrity in Rand's writing, because for Rourke, being who he is and living life the way he wants to live and pursuing his values means being able to design buildings his way. And if he gives that up, he's giving up too much of himself. He's giving up himself if he gives that up. And so when the board says you're being self-sacrificing, he says, no, this is one of the most selfish things you've ever seen, because he cared too much about his own values and cared about his own vision of how things should be done and living that in a consistent way, and that's integrity. And Robinson Crusoe is going to need this integrity to, you know, to keep being consistent in the manner and the values that he produces, and developing a consistent pattern of living. Also, Ayn Rand mentions two sub-principles, or two minor virtues of integrity that I think is interesting. When she talks about integrity in Atlas Shrugged, she says, integrity is the recognition that courage and confidence are practical necessities, that courage is the practical form of being true to existence, of being true to truth, and confidence is the practical form of being true to one's own consciousness. That's what she says. And I think this is suggestive. So I think what she's talking about here is that courage is acting for one's own values in the face of risk or of harm. So it's being loyal to your values when you're at risk, when you're facing something that might cause you fear, It's staying loyal to your values. That's the integrity in this aspect, but that's what the virtue of courage traditionally is. That's a virtue for sure, but it's in the objectivist conception, it's part of the idea of integrity. And Rand says confidence is a virtue. What's she talking about, confidence as a virtue? Well, she's saying that, I think what she's saying is that acting on one's judgment, that holding to one's judgment, even though you could be wrong. Who are you to say? Who are you to say? Confidence is saying, I'm the one to say. I'm the one. I've judged it. If I've judged it, and I know I've done that objectively, I know I've integrated the facts, then it's something I know. And I've got to be confident in that. The classic example of was Frank Lloyd Wright's Johnson wax building columns. When Wright designed the Johnson wax building, he designed these columns. Can you see them? They're like these lily pads. I mean, he designed them to bear more weight than any normal column had borne. And he said he's going to have this in the design. And then just to prove it, he built one. And everyone came out, and he just piled all the weight on it, and piled weight on it, and piled weight on it. And it wasn't like he tested a whole tons of models. He designed it. He understood the principles. He knew it was going to work. He demonstrated it. And that's an example of confidence. But Robinson Crusoe is going to need confidence. You alone in all your activities are going to need confidence, because there are going to be many things you know that are true, and you've got to, if you're, once you're sure, you've got to have the confidence to follow through and make the use of your knowledge and employ it as best you can. So that's the end of my discussion of the core virtues of objectivism and the values that underlie them. And we'll be coming back next time with Alexander Cohen talking about the social virtues and social values and bringing society back in. And then we're going to have even more society in the final lecture as David Kelly talks about justice and benevolence, two important social virtues of objectivism. So thanks. That's it. And I welcome your questions.
You mentioned Robinson Crusoe as an example. I suspect many people in here are more like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, or people in general. There was a major transformation there of improvement and whatnot over time. I'm just curious if there's any lessons from that, if you happen to have seen that movie.
I've seen it. So Mike, could you stay at the mic for a second?
Yeah.
So maybe we can dialogue. So in Groundhog Day, a guy lives one day and doesn't do it right, and then he relives it, but he has the memory of the previous ones, right?
Correct.
In Groundhog Day, I saw another movie where the person forgot, but this one,
it could be,
he remembers it.
An infinite amount of days.
Right. He remembers it until he gets it right in the movie.
And the question is, what is right, and is the direction he went in the right direction or not? Because near the end, he's serving everybody.
Yes. Well, right. Yes.
And so
what's taken to be right is the...
From your observation, was he better in the beginning or the end, or go on to the next question?
Yeah, sorry. I don't remember the details of the movie enough to analyze it at that level. I mean, I think the message of Groundhog Day was fundamentally that you needed to be more conscious of the long-term implications of your actions and the full context of your values. And you needed to be more conscious of what you really wanted out of life. I mean, that's I think, the basic message in Groundhog Day.
Instead of the quick gratification, what is long-lasting?
Long-lasting, right. And how can you get the things that really matter most to you? So I thought, in that sense, that it was on the right kind of premise at that level. Now, in fact, in real life, we don't get to endlessly repeat the same situation.
Only in our dreams.
Yes. But we are often in a similar situation over and over. So I think it's important to bear that in mind and keep doing that. I was at a business conference a few years ago, and one of the speakers, who was an Ayn Rand fan, said, what if they'd been talking about compounding interest, compounding value. So you earn 5% this year, and then next year you earn 5% on top of that total. And just do the math, it grows. It's good. And he said, we should think of life in terms of moral compounding. Moral compounding. Be better this year, then make that better better. And think how rich in character, how rich in virtue, how strong in pursuit of your values, how full of life and happiness you'd be if you could just keep improving your life in that way. That's kind of like taking the opportunities of the things that are similar to improve the way he does in Groundhog Day. Lauren.
I really enjoyed your summary, especially as somebody who studied this for a long time and has attempted to kind of compile things into short videos. So I was impressed how you were able to go through all the values. I did want to ask a question that I've been pondering actually for the past year. The virtue of humility is often talked about in many, many philosophies. And it's something that I've been considering for a long time because I think, personally, I believe that in order to stay rational when you are someone of pride, it's important to have a level of humility to balance out that pride in order to stay rational. What do you think of this? I was curious.
Well, I get where you're coming from, but I don't like it that much. I think when people talk about humility and they're saying something meaningful, they're mostly, I think, talking about honesty and objectivity. They're talking about don't accept a fantasy version of yourself, accept the real version of yourself. Think don't storytell about your life, be on the true premises about your life. That's what I think people are talking about. But certainly there are people who are prone to bragging, they're prone to overestimation of themselves. And so for those people, having a principle of realism, of reality, that's important. So in that sense, I think that's true. I don't like humility in general as a principle, just because its basic principle is that you're small and insignificant. But the truth is, you may not be insignificant. And there are people who are not insignificant. They need a reality orientation too. Like, they need to be on the premise of, think about my situation in realistic terms and in rational terms. They don't need to just think I'm small or nothing. And there's lots of people for whom thinking that they're small is destructive. It's destructive for them because they need to think bigger thoughts about themselves. They're capable of more. They need to recognize it. So that's my concern about it. And that's my take on what's valuable in that humility talk.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
This is more of a comment on the previous question. You're talking about, I've thought of integrity as having compounding. Einstein once said that compound interest is one of the most powerful sources of something ever to have existed. And I've thought about integrity in that regards, and not just in terms of like financial power, but so we're talking about compound interest in terms of once you have adhered to a value, it's larger. And Here's what I'm saying is, I think that integrity in terms of compound interest, like merely adhering to your values for a longer and longer period of time, kind of expresses compound interest because it's reflective of the strength of those values or to which you adhere to them in your life. So as you adhere to your values for a longer period of time, you're reflecting a strength of integrity. Is what I'm saying make sense at all?
I think so. Yeah.
So
How much does what that comment about compound interest and sort of morally compounding your life, how much is that allied to integrity as such? That's a good question, because integrity as a principle points out that you need to be loyal to your values, you need to be loyal to your principles, right? And, you know, in a way, you would think that, say, moral compounding might relate more to moral ambitiousness and pride. You have to think about it more analytically. I would think. But in any case, the idea was just the idea of thinking about your whole life as a moral project and thinking about doing it well, making, and in the integrity parts, partly making it automatic to do it, you know, to improve and then make the improvement automatic. And then build on that, you know, then add an additional better way of pursuing your principles, or a more consistent pursuit of something that you know, a use of some principle that you had never used before, or a more avid pursuit of a value that you thought was important to you. I mean, let's say you thought, you always thought that in addition to being a good doctor, you should be mechanically adept and fix your car well. But you never pushed yourself to do that. But maybe you've automatized a lot of your good doctor skills, then you can devote some attention to improving your car building skills. You make that a set of skills that you have, and then you're better at doing them. Or you've become good at thinking of the truth and telling the truth. You're good at honesty, right? But you want to be better at integration. You want to do more thinking outside the box, more searching out new sources of information and integrating those back in. So you try to develop a practice where you feel more, you start to feel a little uncomfortable if you haven't encountered some challenging ideas or thought some new thoughts, whereas before you didn't feel that way. So that would be building into yourself more of this principle of integration as an active moral principle for you. You could build that into your character. Then you go on to build other things that are good into your character. And you become a fuller, richer, better functioning person that way. That's what I had in mind.
Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. Compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe.
Well, I've often thought that integrity is the most ill-defined, least understood of the virtues. I think we had this discussion several years ago. My idea of integrity is this. In life, it's complicated. We do not have to make decisions on one principle at a time. We have to make a decision, and there's a number of principles that need to be applied to the same decision. And that, to me, is what integrity is. Integrity is the recognition that we don't meet our principal decisions one at a time. and that we have a responsibility to look at the complexity of life in making decisions and integrate all of our knowledge and all of our principles that are necessary for any particular decision.
Well, certainly what you're describing as the situation of people thinking about things and having, trying to put their ethics into practice is real. I think there's going to be this awesome talk at the Atlas Summit. I caught a preview of it last week. David Kelly on good judgment. What you're talking about sounds to me a lot like what David was talking about, and he was calling judgment. That is the ability to deal with a complex situation where a lot of principles are in play, and the importance of thinking clearly about that situation, identifying what's essential, recognizing that there's complexity there, and there's an art to doing that. I don't think of that as integrity myself. I don't, because I think integrity at its essence, and I'm not saying what you're talking about isn't of a piece with virtue and the good life. It is. But I wouldn't assign it to the integrity box, just because I think of integrity as one of the two key principles in objectivism to putting the pedal to the metal, putting the rubber on the road, to do it. There's productiveness, which is go make it, build it, shape it, create it. That's productiveness. But integrity is, it's true, live it. Integrity is, it's true, practice it. So both of them are in the valence of act for the sake of values, use your knowledge in action. But so that's what I think of as integrity.
So doesn't that border on honesty? It's
No.
true, act on it?
No, because honesty is just, it's true, think it and know it. Think it and know it, and if you're talking to other people...
So you see integrity as an action virtue, not a spiritual virtue?
Well, it's a spiritual virtue, but it's just in the valence of from thought to action, rather than from facts and action into thought. So like rationality is about getting knowledge from reality. That's what rationality is about. It's about forming knowledge. How do you get knowledge? And integrity is about how do you put that knowledge to work.
Yeah, integrity is like always resisting any implication of the mind-body dichotomy.
Right,
I
exactly.
think what he's described would be a great thing
We can't
called
hear you.
Prudence.
Yes, actually, the thing you're describing is kind of like of a piece with prudence or practical wisdom, yes. Anyway, catch David's talk on good judgment, and maybe you'll have some thoughts on that too. And I do want to emphasize that the important thing here in thinking about all these principles is identifying what the essential issue is, or the essential facts being talked about by the principle. And then what's the taxonomy of the principles? How do you organize them? That's a secondary issue. The important issue is what's true, and do you know why it's true? That's what's important. I think that's the end of our session. Thank you very much.